You must be very excited because today we are going to talk about a very, very interesting story. It's a story which has a lot of adventure. This is a story which has a lot of curiosity about the startups. And this is one of the best stories when it comes to a rise of an idea, a fantastic journey for raising over $1 billion for a startup, and then the founders going to jail after 20 years. So, we're going to unfold this entire story today, and I'm going to talk about how it actually happened and what are the things where the things went wrong. I know you must have seen a lot of videos, you must have seen amazing YouTube story, like a 60-minute story. You must have watched several articles, you must have read several articles in last probably 10 years because their downfall started in 2016. And I found on YouTube there was a video by Sanjay Gupta on CNN. There was a 60-minute story by Australian reporter. So pretty much those who have been following this story, you know exactly what went wrong with this particular startup. Yes, I'm talking about Theranos by Elizabeth Holmes and another entrepreneur named Ramesh Balwani, who joined her later in this journey, and they become like very thick and thin and closed door partners. So I'll give you a little, summary from the beginning, what happened, how it started. So the idea was very simple. This Elizabeth Holmes was a Stanford. Uh, she was not even a graduate. She was a dropout just after first year. And she developed the idea of creating a patch that would test microscopic blood samples for infectious disease and dose antibiotics for treatment. She even filed the necessary paperwork to acquire a patent. Over a period of first 6 months, a couple of years, they have acquired few patents, and they also got a support from one of her professors. And that's where her rise starts because that professor further introduced her name was Channing Robertson, and then that professor came on board. And actually, once you have those kind of things, when your professors start believing in the student's idea, you should go back and check what's wrong somewhere because that was a great validation from the very beginning. But at the same time, it also, creates a flag. So, but that happened with her, and because at that time she was just 19 and money was a big deal, so because she raised quickly in 1 year, she raised about $6 million. Of course, because the professor was involved and she was on the, one of the board of directors, she inducted her as one of the board of directors in the very early stage of her startup. Well, fast forward after 20 years, idea did not work as it was designed for and technology failed. A lot of other issues happened, and we are going to talk about those. And finally, if you will have seen, 2 days ago, she went to jail for 11 years. Not only she went to jail, Ramesh Palwani also were found convicted for about 9 counts of wire fraud. Now, question is, what is wire fraud? So wire fraud is basically what I could read, and probably you can get a better information from an attorney. But wire fraud is basically when you illegally transfer the money from your company account to either accounts which are personal in nature or somewhere without the information shared in a transparent way with either the board of directors or accounts or somewhere, and which has no transparency. So there are 9 counts of wire transfer, wire fraud, which has happened in this whole journey, which they are indicted for, and they are also indicted for um, not only that, but the fraud with the patients because they created a threat to patients' lives. Now, I'm going to talk about this whole journey in a totally different fashion. I'm not going to tell you the full what happened, what went wrong, but I'm going to talk about in the context of startups, how actually what lessons we should learn and what is there in this story for startups. So if you see, I've been always talking about in my startup um, these startup sessions on Fridays, that there is a framework. There's a healthcare startup framework which every startup, and not only just healthcare, any startup can actually follow. And we are going to talk about each piece of those healthcare framework, each element, each pillar, and then see where this story fits into each element. So wait until you see this new. Okay, I hope you see this. Okay, perfect. So I'm sure you saw this very first screen where one-time tech superstar begins serving an 11-year sentence for carrying out a massive blood testing fraud. So she's the one, very pretty face. She's very young, 32-year-old, has two kids, a husband, and now she is going jail. Think about it. So now when we talk about our what went wrong, right? Just think about it for 1 second. So we talked about these six things in my previous sessions all the time, that an ideal startup should have these six different elements. It should have a fantastic structure. I'm going to talk about the structure. Second thing, it should have a public policy. It should see what public policy it addresses. And because of that public policy, whether that startup solves any kind of problem in the society. And third thing is the technology, what kind of technology you are building. Fourth, accountability, and we are going to talk about it, where they really failed on accountability part. Then fifth thing, who are your consumers, who are your customers, how do you see them. And fifth, sixth and final one is financing. Financing does not means what kind of money you raised from your investor. Financing means what kind of reimbursements, what is the revenue model, what is the pricing model for your product and service. So let's talk about the structure first, because that is the most important thing. And I tell you, from the structure wise, Elizabeth, she was a fantastic person. I mean, she had all kind of good stuff. I mean, if you see, she was a fantastic speaker. She had amazing voice. She had convincing abilities to the investors, to the peers, to everybody who comes into her contact. So she has a magnetic personality, charismatic personality, and that is what needed at the time when you create a structure of your startup, that you should have a personality which resonates with your idea. She had that, absolutely, and that was one of the reasons she was able to intimidate, you know, a lot of those investors, professors, people who came into her early contact, and they become a part of her idea. So she had that structure. She had friends who were supporting her idea. And at that moment, what happens is, when somebody is supporting your idea, you have to really think whether he is your friend or he is your foe. Because at that time, in that, you have should have the ability to see or visualize the future, that how these friends and foes are going to impact my company or affect my company for next 10 years. She has attracted prominent business people, statements like board directors George Schultz, Henry Kissinger, Rupert Murdoch, Larry Ellison, and actually they put a lot of money, I mean, together. If you see in her supporters list, I mean, she receives Walmart's funding $150 million. She receives $120 million from Rupert Murdoch, and then she received $120 million from Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. I mean, I just don't understand. Secretary of Education, where did they get so much money? $120 million they contributed for her idea, and all of them lost their investment when Theranos collapsed in 2018. Think about it. So many more prominent people, and they could not even read, they could not even see what's coming out there. She was 19-year-old at that time, or maybe like 20, 25 year over a period of 5, 6 years, when she raised all of that funding from these investors. She had a magnetic personality, charismatic personality, but her attitude, I mean, her and I heard somewhere like she has changed her voice. She has changed her voice to create more impact on the investors. Think about it for a second. How much desperate she was to make her idea successful and raise funding, because she realized in the early days that everything is about raising funding, creating all of this empire to disrupt the idea of laboratory laboratory and diagnostic labs. I mean, if you have seen, there was a fantastic CNN story done by Sanjay Gupta 6 years ago. It's still there on YouTube video. You would find it. But what was the watershed moment for her? And that was watershed moment was when all of these people invested money, and she started following, and emulate Apple founder Steve Jobs. Probably she must have just read the book 100 times, and she hired Apple designers for the product designing of the laboratory. She gave the name is Edison, and that whole device which she started working on it. She filed patents for all of those things. But one thing in the structure, I would say what she did not get it right, and I would always say that she could not figure out who was his friends and who was his foe. Because the problem started when in 2009 there was another guy named Ramesh Balwani. He joined Theranos and he took care of the day-to-day business operation, and he had no knowledge of biomedicine. Even Elizabeth Holmes did not have a knowledge of biotech. Now think about it, two leaders for $1 billion company in first 10 years, and there are only two leaders and both have immaturity. They did not have the required knowledge to take the product and the services to the finish line. And that's where the employees, they quickly realized, and they hired the best employees, best talent which was available to them at that point of time. But they did not have the leadership themselves to lead that team. They had the leadership to raise funding, to go out and talk about it. They were very good marketeers, PR people for the company and the idea, but they were not the operations leader at the company level who could understand the process and technologies. And that's why, when and especially when Balwani quickly became, known in the company as an, implementer, enforcer. I mean, Holmes did not see it, and Holmes started dating actually Balwani during that time, and they hid their relationship, personal relationship, from all these employees. I saw like there were 600 employees at that time, in between the year 2006 and 2013. Um, how is it possible that somebody would kind of, enforce their decisions without having any knowledge of the process? And nobody was seeing it. I mean, the board was not seeing it. Uh, there was people who were sitting there. There were engineers, scientists. Everybody was there, and they brought those issues. Like there were claims that they performed numerous tests for indication of diseases such as diabetes or cancer, with just a few drops of blood. But she she always says, Elizabeth, if you read her PR, if you read her interviews, she was a fantastic kind of person who was always advocate her technology, but at the same time she never accepted her fault or her team's fault in the back of in her back office where it was really needed. So that's a one thing in the structure, that she did not hear her best friends, and which are the employees who are working on the ground. So that's where, if you see, I'm going to show you where she actually failed. So if you see, this one particular thing in the structure, um, we talked about friends and foes, how it is important. She has a fantastic idea, fantastic structure. Everything was going good, except that she did not have friends in her own office, and she developed enemies right there. She had friends all around the office, outdoor, everywhere else in the society. She was there, like at a Forbes, one of the best persons. I mean, billionaire, youngest billionaire in the Forbes list. But she could not develop friends within her office and her own business. So that's where she lacked and she failed. Now, the second thing we'll talk about the public policy. She had a fantastic idea, I can tell you, and that idea came from the public policy. And initially in 2015, because of that, the US Food and Drug Administrator granted clearance to Theranos for its herb simplex virus 1. So they got 2015, they got a clearance for her device as a 500 510k device. But that was a device. So what happened after that? Once you get 510k device, she quickly jumped into the partnership with different kind of, Walgreens had a partnership. Walmart was the investor into the company. The other, groups, they started pouring money in. And when she started seeing that success, she just ignored the part of the quality, and they continued to build upon the partnership and continue to raise money from investors. And that is where I think they failed. So they accepted the public policy. Because of that public policy, they got a 500 510k approval during the process. But at the same time, they could not cope up with the quality, so they lost their license later on in 2016. But within 1 year, uh, they had kind of, developed a network of investors where they could raise $1 billion in the company. Now think about it, without even a validation from Medicare, CMS, uh, which is a regulatory authority. I mean, they decide how much payment you're going to get for your pathology labs or diagnostic labs. They could not, they could not. So it is very important to know, in a public policy, if you follow a particular public policy, you should be able to abide by the rules in order to continue. Otherwise, you're going to lose the license. And that exactly happened. They started, they got the license in 2015, but in 2016, they lost the license again because the quality of their product and services was not up to the mark. And when that happened, the real problems started right then and there. So they got the uh, they got the approval in 2015, but after that, in 2016, when they have continuous adequate validation, they could not pass the validation. So this is the major ruling. According to the indictment, Holmes and Balwani, they made numerous false and misleading statements in investors' presentation, media interviews, and other forums to promote Theranos technology and attract investments. They claimed that the technology was capable of performing a wide range of blood tests with just a few drops of blood, when in fact it was not reliable or it was not accurate. They also claim that the US military was using this technology or may use this technology in combat zones, which was not true. And these are the two things which basically, went against them. So 11 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. These charges were very, very serious. And because of that, both of them got 11 years of jail. So think about it. They did not follow the public policy seriously. They did not take it. The technology, the third piece which I'm talking about, they used the technology which failed. They claimed that technology was highly accurate and reliable, but it was not. So public policy was abused, technology was failed, and third thing, the accountability towards the investors and accountability towards the patients. And that's exactly happened. It highlights the importance of honesty and transparency in business practices. I've been talking about it. As a startup investors, if you are lying to your investors, if you are, showing your numbers, and that is not fact at your own, at your and your back of your mind or back of your office or back of your business, that's not going to work. In the longer term, you're going to pay back. in some other ways, and this probably turned into a criminal act. So this was huge story and huge lessons for startup founders to take, that the accountability, how important. And I'll give you an example here. See, a perfect example of accountability I will show you. There was a one slide I actually see, there was accountability of this Merck, the company, and I will. So their decision was to stop selling the painkiller Vioxin. It's the most profitable drug, but they, if you see those drug bottles, they always have the risk factors, always explain, and they always go by that. You cannot just, take the risks and not disclose it. But here, both Balwani and Elizabeth Holmes, they both were raising millions of dollars, actually billions of dollars, and without telling the truth and hiding the things. And they did the same thing with patients by not telling them the risk factors and not telling them that this test may not be 100% accurate. That's all it was needed. Okay, so I'm going to take further. So accountability was the major factor where they failed. Technology, they failed. They abused public policy. Now talk about the consumers. They could not pinpoint exactly who were their consumer and who were their customers, because of course they were using a public policy where the insurance companies are going to reimburse the money. They had a partnership with Blue Cross, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Capital Blue Cross membership, but that membership was also terminated in 2016 as soon as they lost the license, 510K license. So the false claims about the military use of the technology, it had a negative impact on potential customers because it was not for military consumers or military patients. And I can tell you where it came from, because one of the board members, I think George Schultz, was a military man, and he came from the defense background. So when you have those fake friends and people who just give you an idea and you really, we call them true believers, because they sometimes just believe in a particular portion of an idea and they interpret it in their own way, and they just think about that idea all the time without giving a logical, kind of background that whether this will work or not work. So I think that was one of the major reasons, and that's the reason Joe Schultz actually grandson became a whistleblower. Think about it. George Schultz was the first investor. His grandson, his name was Tyler Schultz. He was number two or number three in the company, and another person, Erica Chong. They both were the whistleblowers, and that's how in 2016 the whole case came up. And he went to his grandfather while he was alive, and he gave him all the information. But he was being a first board member, he could not do anything to to even so Elizabeth Holmes was a very powerful personality. If you see her attitude, the way she hold herself in the office, she was very, very powerful. And same thing goes with Ramesh Balwani. He was very, very active in networked with a lot of people in Silicon Valley, and that's why he was able to raise funding. But coming back to the consumers, right? They were not able. So actually, their consumers were those investors, because they were paying for the technology, they were paying for running the company, but they were not actually making sure that the company is doing the things which they promised, and that's where it failed. So think about the blood testing services. They believed that the technology was being used by the military, so it will also work, it would be reliable and accurate, and that exactly failed. The patient's perspective failed, and a lot of these patients, when these two people, Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, when they became the whistleblower, they had all the information about the patients, or the patients who were doing the free pilot testing, and kind of thing like what happened. They had those ideas, but they did not have the way to validate. So when this whole case goes into the investigation in last 10 years, all of these patient interviews happened. A lot of these investors who came out, like particular one investor, which is the hedge fund, which raised $96 million. Partner Fund Management. That's a company. It was a hedge fund. They invested $96 million. They are the one actually who sued the company in 2016 for securities fraud. And they alleged that Theranos made false and misleading statements about the capabilities of its technology, including the false claims that it was being used by the US military. Think about it. I have never seen a fund or a companies going back to their startups, and especially in this case it was like less than $100 million, but they did, which was very, very daring act. Actually, more and more investors should go and sue those, the startup founders who actually, breach the trust of investors, taking the money, taking them out for their private leisure. I mean, this woman was like, she was having a tons of wealth using for her own personal, the way she was living a lavish life. It was crazy. I mean, if you Google her, you would find like she had a huge real estate. And how can you take personally money, billions of dollar, when your company is still in stealth mode and you have not returned any money to the investors? That's a big question. So, consumers and financing. So in 2016, all of their partnership started failing. Whether it was, the partnership with um, uh, they had partnership with Walgreens, which started failing. They have, partnership with, Attorney General. They filed a lawsuit against Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes that whatever was committed, it was not done. Several patients who use blood testing services, they filed lawsuit against the company, because all of these things came again with two whistleblowers. So here is my, here's my final thoughts before I let you guys go. They had a great product, great idea, amazing, investors, good friends. They use the public policy, but they abuse the public policy by not keeping the quality and not keeping their promises. They went out and launched their product too soon without testing it 100% at their own level, and they raised too much money. They raised too much money, and they lavishly spend that money on their personal lifestyle. Both Holmes and Ramesh Balwani lost their personal trust in front of their own employees, and that resulted into the poor quality and technology of their product. And ultimately, couple of guys, those who did not, they did not respect them, because think about it, $9 billion company, only two decision makers, and they both are not techie. They both are like, one is a Stanford dropout, another one is an investor, and just who has just a network and PR and media company and connections. So companies, $9 billion company, you cannot run just basis of these two decision makers. And that will result into the collapse of this whole thing. And now finally, they're going to jail. Now think about it. It's 20 years of a journey, started in 2003, ending at 2023, but they will bounce back again. I mean, I was reading her, seeing her picture, she was laughing. I mean, she looks like she has no remorse on her face that what she did was wrong. She still thinks she's going to write a book while she would be in the jail. I mean, whatever it is, but for investors' perspective, for people who have, ideas, and you guys who are going to write new stories, who are going to, create your startups, entrepreneurs, think about it for a second. I mean, investors' money is not a free money. Take that money, think about it as a bank debt first, because they are the ones who are taking the risk on your shoulders, giving you their money. And it's not a free money, it's a hard earned money. Make use of it wisely. Your startup may fail because of, reasons which are unknown to you. But when reasons are known to you, no, it's not the startup's failure, it's your personal failure. So if you know the reason why your startup is going to fail, share it with your investors. You don't know where the help will come. So your investors comes from a lot of wisdom, and they come from a lot of experience which they have had with several other startups. So use that wisdom, use their network, try to ask questions, communicate with them openly, be transparent to them, be accountable to them. And I can tell you, the whole humiliation and collapse what Theranos saw, it could have been avoided if there would be a better communication with employees, if there would be a better research, if there would be a better critical, critics and understand the product very well. They could have solved these quality problems much before it hits the market. So all of these are very important. I wish you all the best. Learn from this story, move forward, go and create a great startup. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward for your questions. If you have any, send it to me through LinkedIn or YouTube, whichever channel you're watching this show. But thank you very much. I'll see you again next Friday.